On the first day my sister disappeared, a large wine jar appeared in our house. The wine in the jar has the effect of changing gender. As long as you drink the wine in the jar before having sex, you can get pregnant with a boy. But I can hear the lid of the wine jar being lifted up every night. I thought someone wanted to steal the wine. Unexpectedly, my myopic sister came back. The villagers said that my sister ran away with a man. I didn't believe it. She was obsessed with going to college and was a fool who only knew how to study. My sister often touched my head and said, "When I pass the college entrance examination and can leave the village, I will take you away too." Although I knew she was lying, I felt a long-lost sense of security when I lay in her arms. It would be great if my sister would be by my side all her life. But such a sister disappeared for no reason. No one in the family wanted to find her. Only a girl. I would be relieved if she ran away. My mother was also gossiping with a few old ladies at the door. It doesn't matter if she ran away. If your stomach doesn't move again, you, the man, should run away. As usual, my mother would hear this. She would take off her shoes and hit the man in the mouth. But she just lowered her head and laughed. 7 days later, my father brought a big wine jar home. The jar was really big. It was big enough to hold a person. My mother said that it was soaked with a golden python. She exchanged her dowry with the old Taoist priest at the entrance of the village. Drinking a cup every night before going to bed can conceive a boy. I don't know if this is true or not, but I have never smelled such a fragrant wine. I couldn't help it at night, so I secretly ran to the yard and wanted to serve myself a bowl. But before I opened the lid, someone grabbed my hair from behind. Grandma picked up a stick and beat me. I rolled and screamed. My parents in the house came out to watch. But in fact, Grandma was also drinking. Secretly. And she drank the most. I don't know what was in the wine. It actually had the miraculous effect of rejuvenating. Grandma seemed to be 20 years younger. She beat me even harder. My parents saw that the wine became less after a few days, so they came to settle accounts with me. Grandma said that I drank the wine secretly. I didn't even taste a mouthful, so I took the blame for it. But this made me more and more greedy. Even in my dreams, there was a scene of a golden python in a wine jar. There was an air outlet at the mouth of the jar. The aroma of wine wafted out from there. I aimed my right eye at the opening. It was dark inside. Something was squirming, but it didn't look like a snake. Then, a bloodshot eye met my eyes. I screamed and rubbed my eyes hard. I couldn't believe what I saw. It was my sister's eye. There was only a mole on my sister's lower eyelid. Everyone in the village knew that my family hid good wine. They crowded at the door of the house. My dad begged them to try it. My dad counted the money while serving them a few bowls. The wine glowed with a faint red. My dad laughed and said that the blood of the python was not drained cleanly. Drinking it would be more nutritious. I wanted to vomit when I thought of the eye in the wine jar. No, it definitely couldn't be my sister. Maybe it was the eye of a snake. I have seen snakes, but not golden pythons. Maybe I missed my sister too much. I just saw it wrong for a moment. The old Taoist priest who sold golden pythons also joined in the fun. He looked like he was eating. He was silly and happy just by smelling the wine. But before he tasted a few mouthfuls, he raised his head strangely and asked, "You didn't dig out its eyes, did you?" My dad shook his head. "Don't you just drain the blood for 7 days?" The Taoist priest stamped his feet in anger. "Stupid! I told you that this thing must have 10 holes to allow the wine to flow into the whole body. The effect of not digging out the eyes can be greatly reduced." 10. Does the cave snake have 10 holes on its body? Oh, what should I do now? Should I fish it out and dig it out? The old Taoist priest pondered for a while. No, the steel nail has sealed the mouth. His cloudy eyes looked at me. I was so scared that my hair stood up. I ran back to the house quickly. I cried to my drunken grandma. I want my sister, I want my sister. Grandma's white hair has turned black. She smiled at the mirror. Your sister can't come back. You drank it all into your stomach. She smiled sinisterly. A smooth and young face became very distorted. I cried and screamed crazily. I knew Grandma was talking nonsense. But I still thought anxiously. What if I really hurt my sister? Not long after, my mother's belly, which had been silent for 10 years, was pregnant. This pregnancy was not found out by a doctor. She felt something running around in her belly. At first, she thought she had roundworms and took a lot of anti-worm medicine. But her belly kept getting bigger and bigger, as if she was 5 months pregnant. After seeing an old Chinese doctor who said she was pregnant, she was so happy that her mouth opened wide. Good, good, our Lee family has a successor. She was crazy like a lunatic. But I didn't have any feelings about my brother who was about to be born, because my death was coming soon. I don't know what the old Taoist priest said. My father looked at me in a strange way. He began to smile at me and bought me a lot of delicious food that I couldn't eat before. He also touched my head, thinking as he touched it, "You kid, you have a beautiful skull since you were a child." I put down all the food and didn't dare to look at him again. This time, my sister didn't help me ward off disaster. My mother couldn't drink anymore after she got pregnant, but she stared at the wine jar in the yard and drooled. Grandma slapped her face. You want to kill my grandson? She finally had a reason to poison the wine. How could my mother dare to disobey Grandma? Besides, this was the child she had conceived with great difficulty. She didn't dare to kill him. But at night, I hid under the window and looked out. I saw her secretly pour herself a bowl. She said to herself, "Let Mom taste you again. How could you kill your brother?" She said something else while drinking. I was afraid and didn't hear it clearly. Time passed faster and faster. There was not much wine left. But there were still 3 drunkards to support at home. My mother's belly was getting bigger and bigger. It was only 2 months. It looked like she was about to give birth. Grandma shook the wine jar vigorously. It couldn't hold a few bowls. She stared at my mother's belly. You must have drunk secretly, right? If my father didn't stop her, she might have pounced on my mother immediately. My mother was swollen all over. From a distance, she looked like a blown-up balloon. The incident happened at this time. She suddenly leaked something redder than blood. My mother was so scared that she didn't even dare to move. Grandma rushed over to take a look. She lowered her head and sniffed. Then she showed a smile scarier than a ghost. I knew you hid the wine. My father hurriedly found the old Taoist priest. The old Taoist priest was drunk all day and didn't look very reliable. But when he saw my mother's blood, he immediately became sober. What a sin! He was so anxious that he was running around. When he saw me, his face changed obviously. You haven't made the container yet. He scolded my father. His yellow teeth were open and the whole room was filled with the smell of alcohol. My father's face was stern. You still have time to think about this. Look at my baby. If he miscarries like this, you can't even think of leaving this room. The old Taoist grabbed my head and dragged me to the bed. I screamed in pain several times. No one came to stop him. Your eldest daughter's evil spirit is almost uncontrollable. She is now looking for something to eat. He took out a lot of talismans from the tool bag on his waist. He made a container out of her sister's skull and pressed her down. I screamed and wanted to run away, but my grandmother pulled me back. She hugged me and laughed. What about the body? This kid can also be soaked in wine. The old Taoist priest cut open my clothes and touched her obscenely. Although she is not as smart as her sister, she is tender and delicate, so the taste should be good. I shivered all over. It was indeed my sister who was soaked in the wine jar. When I thought that I would also have my legs broken and be curled up and stuffed into the jar, I didn't know where I got the strength from. I pushed my grandmother away and ran out. Don't let her run away. It was dark outside and I couldn't see anything. I bumped into the big wine jar. The wine in the jar was all drunk. I knocked her to the ground in an instant. Bang! The wine jar was broken. I lay there in a daze. There was a deathly silence around me. My sister, whose limbs were broken, lay in the debris. Her eyes were wide open. Then they blinked. I had never heard such a chilling laugh. The old Taoist priest who had chased me backed away angrily, evil obstacle. My sister heard the old Taoist priest's voice and stopped laughing. Then she slowly climbed up. She could only rely on her unbroken spinal cord to stand up her upper body, and her limbs were limp on the ground. She was really like a snake. Her eyes rolled around. She saw me who was so scared that I couldn't move. Then she rushed towards me fiercely. The old Taoist priest took out a peachwood sword and blocked me directly. He chopped at my sister's head. What did my sister want to do to me just now? My mind was blank. I was stunned for a long time looking at my sister's fierce expression. I couldn't recognize her face that was soaked and festering. But she grinned and said, "My good sister." The old Taoist priest immediately understood her intention. He picked up the steel nail that fell with the wine cap. Then he grabbed my head and hammered the nail into it. My head seemed to be splitting apart. I struggled and twisted my limbs weakly. My sister seemed to feel the pain, too. She immediately fell to the ground. The old Taoist priest saw the effect and laughed wildly. Then he hammered the nail deeper, inch by inch. I pushed him hard. The overwhelming pain was about to drown me. I looked at my sister, who was also lying on the ground like me. I couldn't even shed tears. My father had been frightened to the point of peeing. When all the nails were gone from my head, I felt no pain. But my sister had already fallen to the ground without any movement. She still wanted to borrow her sister's life. What a wicked woman. The old Taoist priest walked up proudly and kicked my sister. Grandma rushed out at this time. She glanced at me greedily. Then she set her sights on my sister. Can this kid still make wine? I'll dig out both eyes now. It's up to you. The woman's spirit has dissipated. There's no taste when she's soaked. Grandma happily picked up my sister and rushed to the wine cellar. I was left there, thinking sadly. My sister actually wanted to harm me. My sister's great resentment was really directed at me. After that day, my mother stopped bleeding. But her belly was still growing. She held her belly stupidly. But she couldn't even eat. And no one pulled out the nail in my head. She was drilling deeper every day. But I didn't feel any pain. But the strange thing was that I gained a terrible ability. I could see clearly what was in my mother's belly. Quietly soaking in my mother's amniotic fluid was a wriggling python. She looked at me through her belly. It seemed that she was about to break out of the skin. Snake, Mom, my brother is a snake. Countless slaps fell on my face. I felt no pain. I danced like crazy. Haha, there is a snake in my mother's belly. Strange, where is my human brother? My family said I was crazy. I was crazy. I dug out my sister's red skirt from the house. It was my sister's only red skirt. It was given to her by her teacher at school. They all hoped that a smart and hardworking child like my sister would go to college and leave the village. My sister cherished this skirt very much. I hid it so that no one could see it. I acted like a spoiled child to my sister before. I wanted her to let me wear the skirt once. She refused. She is dead now. I put on the skirt and turned around in front of the mirror. I giggled. The wine that Grandma brewed with corpses is not good at all. I can't get drunk. Her white hair gradually grew back. She looked 10 years older. When she saw me wearing a red dress, her eyes widened. She picked up her cane and hit me on the head. With her other hand, she tried to tear my skirt off. Who are you trying to hook up with, you little girl, dressed like this? You stole the wine and the clothes. Are you going to steal my life next time? I'll beat you to death today. She hit me hard, but she was trembling and couldn't use her strength. It didn't hurt at all. It was just like tickling me. I took her cane and broke it in the middle. Her veins popped out and her breathing became heavy. She turned around and cursed. She picked up an axe from the firewood pile and wanted to chop me. Stop it! My dad stood in front of me. He squeezed Grandma's wrist hard. Grandma felt pain. The axe fell from her hand. I looked at the axe and felt familiar. You want to kill your mother to protect this stinky girl, right? Grandma cried and made a pig-killing sound. My dad winked at her. I smiled. They didn't dare to touch me now. The old Taoist priest only said that the steel nails in my head prevented my sister from borrowing her life. But they didn't know what would happen if they killed me. Save her first and deal with it after the baby is born. That night I lay at the door and listened to them discuss. I knew my time had come. Sister, you can't leave, but I can. I couldn't help but smile. It attracted Grandma's attention. She thought I was laughing at her. Her chest kept rising and falling. She finally couldn't stand it anymore. She rushed up to fight me. Without the fragrant wine, she became extremely slow. I dodged and fell to the ground. Wait until I soak you in wine too. I see you are so arrogant. She crawled crazily into the wine cellar. Her hunchback body made her look like a dog. My dad smacked his lips, glanced at me and said, "The skirt is pretty." Greasy hands touched my shoulders. I stepped back in disgust. It seemed that in a distant memory, my dad's hands appeared not only on my shoulders. When he saw that I reacted strongly, he immediately turned his face and slapped me. I gritted my teeth and didn't say anything. Someone kept saying to me in my mind, "What kind of son is he going to give birth to? He's going to give birth to a son." The voice was still laughing, and it made my scalp numb. People in the village said that I looked a bit like my sister. When did your Ernie start to study? The wife of the Liu family mentioned it unintentionally when she was chatting with my mother. She kept staring at me reading in the yard. This is my sister's book, not mine. I just want to see. What exactly hooked my sister's soul? What made her so eager to leave the village? My mother probably has no energy left. Thinking back on this kind of thing, Her belly is about to explode. And the rest of her body is getting thinner and thinner. It's like she was sucked dry by the fetus. Where is she? I can't read in the house. She doesn't even know the characters. She finally panted and said it out while holding her eyelids open. The wife of the Liu family seemed to be thinking about something. She smiled awkwardly. Your Ernie's big but will definitely give birth to a son. I have calculated her fortune for you. She will bring prosperity to her husband and descendants. My mother opened her eyes with a cry. She sat up and looked at me sitting in the yard without any scruples. There was resentment and jealousy in her eyes. The wife of the Liu family gave her a meaningful look. My mother almost lost her life in order to give birth to a son. She also committed such a great sin. Now she can only lie here half dead. She really has no place to vent her hatred. So that night she called me into the house. Your brother is about to be born. He is different from you and your sister. He is the heir of our Li family. You have to go to school, eat well, and learn to be a good person. She touched her belly while muttering to herself. It seemed as if she sensed something inside. She poked her belly fiercely. My mother smiled in surprise. Then she raised her head and smiled at me, saying, So, you don't have to worry about home. Before I could react, the sack was put on my head. Several strong men lifted me up. They were going to take me away regardless of my struggle. The new daughter-in-law of the old Liu family is here. The voice of the daughter-in-law of the Liu family sounded like a silver bell. She giggled. I struggled hard. The man felt pain and threw me to the ground. I will teach you how to be obedient first. The man slapped me as he said this. Seeing that I wanted to escape, he pulled me back. He pressed my head and banged it against the ground. The needle in my brain pierced deeper. I screamed in pain like crazy. I heard someone shouting in a daze. Snakes, all snakes. Light a torch quickly, don't be stunned. I opened my eyes, and countless snakes crawled out of the wine cellar. Some were big, some were small, some were poisonous, and most of them were different in shape. But they all had fangs that could bite people. They passed me and rushed straight to those people. They bit them one by one. I stood there with my eyes open for a long time. I saw them surrounded by snakes. They screamed and tried to run away, but they were bitten countless times. Hee hee, a sinister laugh came from my mind. I laughed with her. I ran to the entrance of the village to find the old Taoist priest. When I knocked on the door, he was drunk. He was more like a drunkard than a Taoist priest. He smiled when he saw me. Isn't this the second daughter of the Li family? I held the knife in my hand and smiled back. He also noticed it and chuckled, What's the matter? I saved your family's lives and you want to give it back? I raised the knife and pointed it at my head. Help me pull out the nail. The old Taoist priest narrowed his eyes and looked at me for a while. He stepped aside and motioned me to go in. His house was covered with talismans. There were many people's birth dates on the table. I turned my head to look at him. He threw away the wine pot and took the knife. This nail pierced your brain. It made your sister unable to borrow your life. Take the nail out now. Maybe she will borrow your life and live again. Your sister is very resentful. Fortunately, she called me over in time that day. Otherwise, your mother, your father, and your grandmother would have been eaten by the snake fetus. And you would have borrowed your life. From then on, you and that dead girl, the life of my son is tied to his. He threw away the knife and lay on the sofa with a smile. I lowered my eyes and picked up the knife. It was you who asked them to soak my sister in the wine jar. The old Taoist priest was already drunk and unconscious. He counted the days with his fingers. I told him, but I was determined to do it to your whole family. Ha ha ha, he took me to the backyard. The yard was full of wine jars. He pointed them out to me one by one. That was the third daughter of the old Sun family. This was the dead female fetus of the old Lu family. My heart was pounding. The needle in my head was about to explode. I can't take back your sister. But I have to take back something. Turning around, he was about to stab the knife into his body. He grabbed me with a grappling move, and his movements were extremely agile. I was unwilling to be suppressed by him. I could only stare at him. He said with a smile, "Don't you want to pull out the nail? Make a deal with me, and your mother's fetus in her belly will not be saved. She is pregnant and still wants to continue drinking wine, which is also retribution." He sighed and said, "When your mother gives birth, you can seal it with this one of mine. Then put it in the jar and give it to me. Then I will help you take out the nail." My head suddenly hurt. Violently. It seemed to be torn in half by the nail. Almost without thinking, I clicked, nodding. The old Taoist laughed up to the sky. He rubbed my head vigorously. He threw me a pot of wine. The wine didn't smell good at all. When I thought that this was also the wine made by those women, I wanted to vomit. So I poured it on the ground. The old Taoist didn't seem to care. It had been soaked for decades. It had no taste. I didn't feel bad to pour it out. He laughed. He glanced at the label on the mouth of the wine pot. Chao Zhao, the old Taoist, was the only one with the surname Chao in the whole village. And his wife, who died 30 years ago, was surnamed Zhao. I thought silently. The nail in my brain seemed to agree with me. After a circle, the whole village knew that there was a snake disaster in my family. It also killed people. When I got home, many people gathered at my door. How could she give birth in less than 3 or 4 months? It must be something unclean. I saw it with my own eyes. Mrs. Li hid the female corpse in the wine jar. Oh, could it be Li Tao? It was so unlucky. I looked at the person. She was the daughter-in-law of the Sun family. His daughter was soaking in the old Taoist priest's wine jar. No midwife dared to deliver my mother's baby. They were too familiar with this process. It was definitely a bad omen. My mother screamed more and more miserably in the room. And my father sat at the door and smoked. Grandma pushed the door open and poured out a basin of blood and mucus. She smiled foolishly. Then I walked into the wine cellar step by step. I had to quickly block her lower body. I couldn't let the fetal wine leak out anymore, it would be such a waste. I walked into the room. The scene in front of me was very scary. My mother was lying on the bed, blood was flowing all over the floor. I stepped into a thick layer of blood. Her belly was still big. It was even visible to the naked eye that it was still growing slowly. Something kept trying to pierce her belly. It looked like a snake's head or a tail. Every time that thing pushed hard on the upper part of her belly. My mother screamed in pain. I picked up a pair of scissors and walked towards her. She noticed me, cried, shook her head and backed away. Xiaomei, I was wrong. Mom, I wanted to save you. She didn't believe it and shouted at the top of her voice, loudly, "Come and save me, she wants to kill me. She wants to kill your son." My father rushed in with a cigarette in his mouth and an axe in his hand. He told me to get out with red eyes, but he didn't even dare to look at my mother. The axe pierced my head. No, it was the needle in my head. A scene that didn't exist in my memory flooded into my brain. I was thrown into the woodshed by my parents. Grandma picked up an axe and chopped my limbs. Then hung me on a pole and let me bleed for 7 days. Then hammered a steel nail into her head to seal her evil spirit. Someone approached. I shouted at the door, "Sister, save me." I woke up in shock. This is my sister's memory. But the pain spread from my brain to my limbs. I seemed to have really experienced it myself. I fell to the ground with my limbs weak. My father approached and raised the axe tremblingly. "Xiaomei, live well down there, and let our family go." Suddenly my father opened his mouth wide. He was trembling all over and was about to run out, but was immediately held back by something. I looked closely. It was a huge golden python. But where did the python come from? I looked back along the snake's body. My mother lay there helplessly, bending her head to look at me. She was motionless. She gave birth. The stomach burst open. A genuine golden python was born. My father knelt on the ground. He tried to pry open the snake's head that was biting his calf. But the snake bit tighter and tighter. Finally, it bit off his calf. "Save me, save me." But no one could save him. I had a hard time even getting up. I could only watch him being swallowed by the snake. That snakes digest food really fast. And they get bigger after eating. It turned its head and stared at me with its snake eyes. "Sister," I called it softly. It spit out its tongue. The old Taoist priest kicked the door open. When he saw the scene in front of him, he was able to remain calm. He flew over and threw a talisman at me. "I knew you were not dead. You wanted to borrow your sister's life, but it was not enough. You also swallowed your unborn brother." The dead woman took my sword. This old Taoist priest is quite capable. He drew out the peachwood sword at a very fast speed. But this time, Sister didn't give him any what chance. It rushed out of the room directly, summoned the snakes that had been hiding in the wine cellar, and planned to bite the old Taoist priest to death in one fell swoop. The room became quiet. Only I was left, unable to move, and a dying mother. My mother had never been as quiet as she was now. I crawled over, like a baby who could only crawl, and lay down in front of her bed. I looked at her dead eyes, and she looked at me. Finally, she shed tears. "Where is my son? Let me see my son." Swallowed by a snake, I told her obediently. Her eyes were wide open. Her chest slowly stopped rising and falling. "Xiaomei, I don't want to die." She cried and shouted at the ceiling. I have to live to become a mother-in-law. I haven't enjoyed happiness yet." With her crying, I gradually felt sleepy. It was like when she shook me when I was a child. It was the same at that time. She coaxed me to sleep while crying. Finally, she stopped crying. Her eyes were still open. She bled dry. Suddenly, there was a roar in the yard. The magic circle was active. I struggled to go. Climbing outside, I saw that the golden snake had many wounds from being stabbed by the sword. Her eyes were full of hatred as she looked at the old Taoist priest. She struggled and showed her sharp teeth. The old Taoist priest was also injured. He was panting and almost couldn't stand steadily. The man and the snake were in a stalemate. Clang! When Grandma came out of the wine cellar drunk, she was tripped by the iron basin. She stood up staggeringly and turned into a teenage girl. Ha 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 ha, she didn't even look at the situation in front of her, but just laughed. The long accumulated hatred surged up. I couldn't tell whether it was my sister's or mine. So suddenly my body had strength. I rushed to Grandma's side and bit her neck. She was startled and scratched my head hard. But it was useless. My teeth were deeply embedded in her blood vessels. The pain of blood loss made her whole body spasm. The old Taoist priest shouted that it was not good. He wanted to rush up and stab me to death. But my sister hugged her body. She was entangled hard on her side, and I was sucking hard on my side. I just regained my youth, Before Grandma finished speaking, her white hair and wrinkles returned. And I felt my body light and full of infinite power. My sister was stabbed hard. She fell to the ground helplessly and twisted wildly. After all, she was no match for me. The old Taoist priest chuckled. But he didn't notice me holding up the axe behind him. I chopped it down fiercely. The old Taoist priest was knocked to the ground by me. I quickly chopped off his limbs. He screamed louder than anyone else. I looked at the dying golden python on the ground with tears in my eyes. I hugged her. She almost died. Sister, we are fine, everything is fine. When I said this, the old Taoist priest behind me climbed up tenaciously. He grinned at us. You think everything will be fine if you kill me? He laughed. If I die, the evil spirits of those female ghosts can't be sealed. They will come to the door soon. I looked at him coldly with my eyes wide open. Impossible. Those evil things did come looking for him. They all revolved around him. When they came to my house before, I found the old Taoist priest's birth date and opened the lid and threw it into the wine jar. They knew who to kill. Don't. They rushed towards him fiercely. It seemed that a black shadow had formed. But there were constant wailing sounds from the black shadow. Finally, the black shadow disappeared. Only a bloody mess was left. I looked down at the snake in my arms again. Tears fell sadly. The nail stuck in my head suddenly shook violently. Sister, live well. You have to live with my life. Then the nail seemed to disappear. I could no longer feel it. The long-awaited peace of mind swept over me. Let me hold the python and sleep soundly in this bloodstain. Xiao Tao from the old Li family came back suddenly. She disappeared suddenly. She came back suddenly. When she saw the blood-stained house, she cried and fainted. The red skirt on her body became even redder due to the blood. The Lu family's wife temporarily adopted her. While comforting Xiao Tao, she looked at her with ill intentions. Why don't you stay in the Lu family? We will support you. Why didn't she notice it before? Xiao Tao's butt is as big as Ernie's. But Xiao Tao shook her head. She wiped away her tears and smiled in refusal. I'm already married. This is against the rules. The Lu family's wife smacked her tongue. Thinking of this, she became cold to her. She was about to drive her out. Xiao Tao still returned home. The 3 bodies were cleaned up. Since that happened, no one dared to approach the Li family. The pub was closed down. But the next day after Xiao Tao came back, she opened the pub. She brought 2 jars of good wine from somewhere and placed them at the door. One jar was labeled Yang Strengthening and the other Yin Tonifying. Men who drink it have better spirits and women who drink it have fewer wrinkles. With this gimmick, the Li family's business has become better again. But once someone asked Xiao Tao, "Boss lady, how do you make this wine?" Can you tell me the recipe? She smiled and said, I soaked pythons in wine. I caught it from the mountain, and it just happened to be not dead yet. Another drinker tasted it slowly, and it was indeed the taste of snake wine. The Oldley family's jar had the same taste before. But this jar was a bit fishy, with a strong smell of snake blood. And the other jar was e'en tonifying. It was too old to drink, and it smelled like an old man. Xiao Tao just smiled with his head down, wiping the wineglass with his hands. Extra. I finally got into college. I'm leaving here. Before I could share the good news with my sister, I was knocked unconscious and thrown into the woodshed. Grandma cut off my limbs. Mom and Dad hung me on a pole. I was in so much pain that I couldn't even scream. There was a figure swaying at the door. I recognized it was my sister at a glance. I used up my last bit of strength to shout, "Sister, save me." The figure paused for a moment and slowly pushed open the door of the woodshed. I was overjoyed that it was really my sister. She looked at me in surprise. When I was about to explain, she said, "Sister, do you want to run away?" I was stunned and didn't understand what she meant. I got into college, you put me down. I'll take you with me, let's leave this shitty place. My sister hesitated for a moment and finally lowered her head. You're lying, you don't want to take me away at all. I went through your luggage and only bought one ticket. Right? When she raised her head, her eyes had become fierce. I tried my best to explain to her that if she let me go, I would buy her several tickets. But she didn't let me go. Sister, please do this for me this time. Otherwise, they will come after me. The sister who said this was really ruthless. Finally, she extinguished my last hope of survival and ignited my deepest hatred. When she was soaked in the wine jar, I seduced her to drink my blood and even entered her dream. As long as she drank it, I could control her and become her. It doesn't matter if she doesn't drink it. Let the Taoists think that I want to borrow her life. Drive the nail that brought my blood into her head. I didn't intend to borrow her life. This is not borrowing, but repaying. Sister looks smart, but she is actually a fool. Born in this village that eats women and only wants male fetuses. The first thing we should think about is how to survive. But her mind is full of thoughts about how to escape. If she had been more careful, she would have seen the master bedroom secretly lighted in the middle of the night. She would have heard what the people inside were plotting. Aranai is stupid and dumb. What if my grandson is influenced by her? I still have to choose Xiao Tao. But Xiao Tao is a good material for college entrance examination. It is because she is a good material. So the nutrients are sufficient. I dare not close my eyes every night. Because there are a group of butchers living next door. Only my sister sleeps peacefully. I envy her so much that she can go to school, make friends, and have the opportunity to escape from such a place. And I can only silently guard hell and be assimilated by the devil. Once I curiously went to my sister's room and flipped through her books. But she was very angry when she found out. I asked her to teach me to recognize words. I also want to read some books like her. I want to have a dream. I don't want to live numbly anymore. But she laughed for a long time as if she heard a joke. You are not good at studying. She asked me to help with the housework and not think about other things. This way she can do less work and have more time to study. I think such a sister is extremely hateful. But fortunately, the arrogant sister was hung in her position. I have been hiding at the door and watching. Even though she is so far away, her blood still splashed all over me. Sister, are you running away now? She didn't answer, but just lowered her head. Her eyes were blank, she really became a fool. Every time I saw her, I brought her a piece of roasted sweet potato. I don't know what big mistake she made. They didn't even give her food. I was afraid she would die. Whether my sister died or ran away, it would be the same ending for me. As long as she didn't leave me, it would be fine. The end.